I want to talk through a variety of different lighting setups, and I'm going to use a scene that I prepared previously for a different video where I created a simple still life. So I've got a sphere, a cone, a torus, and a cube, and I threw in one of each of the core light objects that Blender offers. So there's an area light, a point, a spot, and a sun, and I'm going to begin by actually deleting all of those items. So I'm going to hit delete. And if you don't have a scene set up, just throw a few common objects in, create a simple still life. Make sure that it has a floor or a plane or a ground of some sort. That way when we add lights, we can see how the shadows and light types really interact. I'm going to begin with first creating we'll call it the Key 3 lighting setup. And this is a popular lighting setup in product photography, and it will likely help you set up your upcoming project where you do a 3D product shot. And this Key 3 lighting setup involves 3 different types of lights. And when I say types, I mean strategically the type of light it is, not that practical type. So there'll be a key light that does the main work of illuminating the object. There is the rim light, which comes from behind the object, and its job is to help establish the form and the shape. And then there's a fill light, which is help there to balance out some shadows. So each of these 3 strategic lights, for lack of a better word, could be a point, could be a fill, or a point, could be a sun, could be a spot. So they have different jobs, even if they might be the same type of light. Here we go. I'm going to start with my rim light. Now my rim light, I'm going to use a sun object, a sunlight. So I'll go to Add, Light, Sun. And by default, my sun is spawned inside my cube, so I need to move that, whoops, maybe make sure I have my move tool. I need to move that up. And I've got these 3 views here. If you're not in your 3 views, you can hit Control-Alt-Q to pop back and forth. And so I have a top view, my front right, and then my camera perspective is on the right, just so that I can see what's going to show up in my render. And so I'm going to move my sunlight around in my scene. I'm actually going to move it behind my cube and all my other objects. So if you can see in my top view, here's my camera. It's looking at my cube on this particular edge. So my sunlight is going to be kind of behind and opposite my camera, maybe off to the left or the right. Left or right isn't really that important, but having a sunlight just go straight into the camera might not always be the best angle. So I usually just knock it off that center line just a little bit. And then in one of my other views, I can angle my sun so that it's actually kicking an interesting shadow towards the camera. Now this might not be super pleasing right away, so I may move it up and move the focus down using the golden focus dot, just so that my shadows aren't like too extreme. You know, this is the sun after all. Maybe this is a, kind of midday, so the shadows aren't too long. This is going to establish just the general light in my scene. So I want to have the strength high, but not too high. Maybe a value of 10 would work. With no other lights in the scene, this is going to look quite bright. Hitting F12 will give me a look, and oh my gosh, it looks so stark and so bold. But bear with me. We're going to add some other lights to the scene, and we'll balance these lights out. So starting with a value of 10, or even if that one's scaring you, maybe a lighting value strength of 5 would be a good start. Color of lights frequently is not pure white. We usually kind of come off center just a little bit. We're pulling in some blue, some green, some yellow, some red. It just kind of depends on what type of light you're using. Sunlight can have a tendency to have a bit of a greenish tint to it, a little bit more on that side, occasionally some blue. So I'm going to knock it just to the right, give a little bit of like a blue hue to it, ever so slightly. Next up in my Key 3 setup is going to be my fill light. And so I'm going to use my fill light to just get rid of some of these super harsh shadows in the front. I can use a point light, I can use an area light. It depends on personal preference on which type of light you use. Let's go ahead and use a point light for our example. Add, light, point. And this point light I'm going to put off to the front of my scene. And I can pull it off here, maybe a little bit down, off the center of my cube. And I'm going to set its power to something like 250. And after I do that, you can see that my point light illuminates the front face of all these objects, and it does a really nice job. Now my cube's in the way of my cone, and there's some weird shadows being knocked around there, so maybe my point light needs to come off to the left just a little bit, so that way it kind of brings some life to that cone that's previously super dark. It knocks a nice bit of light into that sphere that if my point light was over here, that sphere has a weird like seam appearing there. So move your light around in a way that looks pleasing to you. You're trying to get rid of those really harsh seams, maybe super dark shadows, that sort of thing. And if it's too bold, if you're too close to your objects, it'll look like there's a firefly buzzing around or something. So you may want to pull it off just a little bit, just so you get a softer look. And we may want to play around with some color. Now, in a typical lighting setup, you might find that your backlight or that directional light gets a little bit of blue, and your foreground is lit a little bit more warmly. So if we get a little bit of like peachy tan colors, some reds, that sort of thing in our fill light, that could be okay. Even going over here to like kind of pinks and those types of colors. So there we go. Point light, fill light, check. Last, our key light. And our key light typically has the highest intensity, so if this point light is at 250, our key light might be at 500. And this can be used, created with either a point or a spotlight is very common as well. Let's go ahead and use a spotlight just to get more practice with the various light types. Create a new spot, move it up in my scene, and I'm going to put it over to the right here on this side. So it's opposite my point light, aka fill light, and at least on that axis, and then it's really kind of running in line with my camera. I'm going to change its focus by grabbing the yellow dot, and I'm going to point this right at that front face there, the one that's kind of shaded. And I'm going to remind myself that this thing has like a power of 10 right now. So like if you think about it, the weakest bulb in your house is probably a 40-watt bulb. Maybe some of you have like little candle like 15 watts. This is at 10. It's very, very, very faint. So let's pump this up to 500. And doing that is going to really brighten our scene quite a bit. I'll adjust the focus, as we don't really want that real harsh light angle on our cube. So I will, it's much softer. And I want to soften on that torus edge and the sphere maybe, so I will back my spotlight up, aka my key light. I'll move it left and right, and maybe a little bit higher in case I can get a little bit more on that cone. And then I'll knock it down just a tad. I can increase the size of my spotlight so that way it hits everything. Maybe increase the blend so my shadows are real soft. And lastly, I can change the color so that way my key light has some real identity to it. I might make this one, I was gonna move maybe that blue. I know it's kind of odd to not have it with warm colors, but that blue, that pink, all those work together real nice. I'm gonna hit that render key just to see. Yeah, it's really soft, really smooth. But I'm not gonna leave it there. Let's go ahead and get some warm color on it. And then based on my distance, if I need to go to 750, that's okay. If I need to go up so high as the 1500, that could be fine too. Just so that my key light really, is kind of the star of the show and really gets a lot of that light in there. So we're getting some pretty nice results. There are a few things that are happening though. My cone is pretty flat. My sphere is okay. But we're getting like a shadow cut from the cube. Torus looks kind of nice. I also see my cube floating. So there's a few things here that are happening that are kind of odd. I would probably keep working on that cone, which is by far the most challenging shape, to make sure that its form is well rendered. My sphere looks pretty good and the rest do, but that cone is quite problematic with that real hard shadow behind it, right? Don't want that there. So I might keep working on this, and I may have to go beyond 3 lights. This is called a key 3 because it utilizes each of the 3 roles of lights of rim, fill, and key. but you can add more lights. So for example, if I really wanted that cone to show off, I might Control C, Control V this point light here, and throw its own fill light on that cone back there, just so we can get a little bit more of its look. So by sneaking one in there, this render has a little bit more form to the cone. You can see the shadow, a little bit of light there, a nicer kind of shade on the sphere. So with a couple extra lights, we're getting some more interesting looks there. Now, one thing that always throws me off on these, and this seems to be really unique to Blender, but if you're coming from other 3D software or even just a beginner to Blender, you may notice that despite my cube and everything else laying on the floor, my cube has this like little etch, this little like kind of distance between the cube and the shadow. Now my cube, if you look here, zoom in, and my plane are basically on top of one another. Even when I cut the two together and make sure that my cube is going through and I hit F12, there's still like a little bit of space in that shadow that makes my cube look like it's floating. This frustrated me for a long time, but this comes from this rendering engine as well as the different light properties. So right now this is coming from my sun, and my shadow has a property on it. So if I click sun, I go to light properties, I go to shadow, there is a connect shadows option. And when I hover over this, I'll give an explanation. It uses screen space ray tracing to have the correct shadow near an occluder, which essentially is meaning when it's calculating these shadow maps, sometimes it doesn't get it perfect. And when you click connect shadow, it's actually going to try and force those shadow gaps together. Sometimes you have to mess with the distance, so I think like a 2 meters here, maybe a thickness of 0.1 maybe will work. Let's see what we get there. Yeah, a little bit better. We're getting a few kind of itchy edges over here, but you may have to play around with the contact shadows. I said connect earlier, I believe, but contact shadows. Mess around with some like distance properties. Maybe the bias needs to be a little bit higher, 0.1, and you may get some cleaner looks. So experiment, explore, and get more familiar with using these different light types. Mess around with different color variations and different intensities, and that sort of thing, and observe and see how even just changing a few settings like color can instantly take your scene from bright and airy to mysterious and dreamy just with a few clicks.